Hello, this is Valkor Drake Rider, and today I have a new housing creation to show you. For the last few months, I have been working on this absolute behemoth of a castle magic contraption. I have made Pong in Wizard101, or at least as close to Pong as you could probably get. Inevitably, there are bugs. There have been many bugs that I have already sorted out. But, you know, that's in the past. That's just, the last 3 months of my life has been essentially just planning out and putting this all into action and getting rid of all the strange, weird bounces and weird paddle-to-ball contacts and random stuff like that. But, I'm just happy that I could have come out of it with, something that resembles Pong. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you, and once we've played through a full match, then I'll get into the actual castle magic so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. Alright, here we go. So this is a player versus bot. There were a few challenges in trying to get it work as a 1v1 player versus player. And in the end, it just made a lot more sense to make it player versus bot. And truthfully, I am very pleased with the result. So, the way that we move, you may have seen for a second that we start on a rug. Well, that rug has a player detector on the front and a player detector on the back of it. When we run forward, the paddle moves up, and when we run backwards, the paddle moves down. So, as you might be able to tell as well, when the ball makes contact with the bottom of the paddle, it generally sends it downwards, top of the paddle upwards, and the center a more shallow or straight shot. There is some variance in this, among other things. Particularly because we're working with a lot of item detectors, which is why sometimes it'll look like the paddle shouldn't quite hit it, and it does. It's because item detectors don't have a very fine radius, even in their smallest detection range. So in a very small space like this, trying to overlap them to keep really good track of what's going on with the physical moving objects, they tend to overlap, and some of them get activated that shouldn't at different times. This happens less often than the right thing happening. But if nothing else, it's just kind of a compromise I have to make in order to get a lot of other things functionally working here. So as you can see at the top, when we score a point, a counter counts up. It'll do the same for the bot. It'll just show the score of the person who last scored a point. Once a player or bot has reached 7 points, it will go ahead and finish the match and reset it all so we can start over. So this takes, I believe, 441 castle magic items, which is, as far as I know, the most castle magic dense housing zone that has been made before. I would love to hear if somebody actually made something with more space, because I'm sure anything that comes remotely close to that is going to be quite the interesting system. Now this uses a modifier system, and essentially what the modifier system is doing is when you hit the ball at an upward angle, the next hit that hits the ball upward is going to travel at a steeper angle upwards. Same thing if you're hitting it downwards. And then the opposite will occur, wherein if there's a very steep angle upwards and you hit it with the bottom of your paddle, it's going to lessen that steepness. So our bot here, you may notice, is following the ball pretty accurately most of the time, and then occasionally whiffs. What's actually happening is we have random reflectors in the sequence of the paddle's movement. So these random reflectors are mostly filled with responses that will send the paddle to a location that is able to receive the ball, but each one also has an option or two to send it to an incorrect location so that it misses. I wanted to make it still as difficult as possible, but more so than being a game of outplay your opponent, it's more a game of endurance, in truth. So the harder challenge about this game would perhaps be how quickly you can beat it, as opposed to actually beating it in the first place. Because, in my opinion, once you really get a good idea of your own paddle's detection, it's pretty difficult to actually get out. Now, there have been some misbounces so far this match, but I've got to say I'm pretty pleased. We have not been encountering much buggy behavior, truthfully. Interesting thing is, as our opponent misses the ball, and we'll be looking at this in a bit, the player side paddle actually doesn't use item detectors to detect it. And this is on purpose because, as I said before, while being very essential for this project, item detectors are actually kind of the bane of this project as well. So the less of them that I can include, the more accurate the system I'm going to be able to make. Now, fortunately, on the player side paddle, I was able to do this. Essentially, whenever the paddle moves, it's also going to send the appropriate signals to computers that correspond as we win here. Hooray. And on the other hand, the bot side paddle, actually part of the way that tracks the ball is it operates in conjunction with the modifier system. So I have to actually separate the activation of movement from the adding of signals to computers, which correspond to the actual bouncing of the ball. So I have to use item detectors to trigger those computer signals, since the movement can solely be devoted to the ball, and that's it. Alrighty. So, now that we've gone and done a playthrough, and of course if we lose, it's going to display you lose as opposed to you win, we're going to go ahead and get into the actual castle magic of it. Alrighty, here we are on the outside of the dorm, and we can get a good look at all of the castle magic that we have involved here. I don't intend to go too in detail about this, otherwise we would be here for a very, very long time. So mostly, rather than going through the actual castle magic, I'm going to kind of just tell you what each section is there to accomplish. So let's go ahead and we'll start with the paddle movement for the player side. So the paddle movement for the player side is controlled over here. When the player moves forward, it's going to trigger this magic player detector, and that magic player detector is going to trigger this reflector. This reflector will add 1 to every single one of these counters. And the way that I have them set up is one counter is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way going up through 9, except in this case, it's only going up until 8, because I'm using the lower value on this to act as one of the settings, or the very bottom setting, in fact, so that I can save myself 1 space. And you can see with how much space is being taken up here, every single space that I can save really, really matters. And then it's, of course, going to be just the opposite, is whenever this player detector is triggered, it's going to trigger that reflector and subtract from all of them, okay? Each of these is tied to one of the reflectors in this column, and it tells the paddle to move to that reflector and adds corresponding signals to the computers. So the reflectors from the paddle actually add signals in diagonals, because each of these going in straights is representative of a point that the ball can travel to. So the paddle covers up to 3 of those points, therefore it works in diagonals, with these on the bottom part represent sending the ball upwards, and these on the lower part sending the ball downwards. And then, of course, the middle being unchanged. So, now that we're through that part, we can talk about the actual ball detection, which is actually very simple. All it really is these item detectors detecting when the ball travels to a certain point, activating their current corresponding reflector, and adding the signals instead of in rows, or rather instead of in diagonals, it's adding in columns, right? So the top one's going to add to the first column. Since the paddle can only the bottom of the paddle, actually this one corresponds to this one, since this is the bottom of the space down here. But since the bottom can only be touched by the very bottom of the paddle, we only have one computer because only one option is available there if the ball gets sent there. And then same thing here, the top of the paddle still can't touch it, but now the center can at the next point up. And then we have that flip-flopped on the other side. This is completely identical to the other side. There's a lot of nuance to making it work, but again, I won't get too much into that because I think that would take far too long, because each of these has a few more spells than just adding the signals. And when you get into some of these ones that have 3 of each, it definitely would be a lot to start explaining every single one of them. Same with the reflectors here, which are doing some other things. Yeah. There's also some other smaller tidbits. I'm not going to explain what all of the timers do. I'm not going to really explain this too much. So these we're going to actually get into next. The modifier system and the actual movement points that the ball is traveling to. So each one of these reflectors is a point that our ball can move to. The only thing that any of these reflectors contain is a move target here. Now the reason that this is significant, and you may be thinking, wait, that's a huge waste of space, right? Because we're having these items, these reflectors, and their whole purpose is to hold 8 items, but they're only holding 1. They're only holding 1 spell. But actually, their role is to literally just move the ball. They're effectively separating the modifier itself. In other words, the changing of angles and points that can be moved to. They're separating me changing the potential angles from the actual activation of the ball's movement. Because I can have these activate the reflectors, and that reflector could be in several different places at once, which is what these counters in this box are actually doing. So I have these big long rows of reflectors, and this is the modifier system. It's pretty complicated, so I won't get too much into it, but effectively the modifier system gets adjusted depending on the angle that the ball was last hit, and it affects these rows of reflectors. These rows of reflectors are literally just setting all of these counters to 0, or adding 1 to all of these counters. And depending on the values that these counters store, they're actually going to teleport all of these reflectors on both sides to different points. So for example, you might look at this one here. When it equals value, which is a regular setting, no changed angles, it's going to teleport its exact corresponding reflector to it. However, when it's over value, it's going to be shifted down by 3. And when it's under value, it's actually not going to do anything. Which I won't get too much into why that's going to happen, but when we look at something that's more centered, you can see it has under and over value. So effectively what's happening is this modifier is shifting the locations of these reflectors along these counters to sharpen the angles upwards or downwards, depending on what's going on, or to bring it back to the center. Okay, so that effectively explains most of the modifier system. The ceiling and floor bounces work a little bit differently, because unlike with the paddles, the balls need to immediately bounce when they hit the ceiling and floor, which may seem simpler to you, but there's the issue that they aren't controlled by any particular player, which means that any particular point needs to be able to bounce both to the left and to the right, and it needs to be able to differentiate which way is correct based on who had their last turn. Because if the bot's paddle hit the ball to the left and it hit the ceiling, naturally it should be bouncing to the left, continuing in that direction, but we really don't want it to just bounce right back to the right, because for obvious reasons, that wouldn't be very functional. So essentially, and this is actually a really cool thing, so I will show this off a little bit more in detail. When our item detectors get activated, they're each activating their own reflector. And this reflector is adding 2 to its own counter, and then immediately setting it to 0. Now, the reason it's adding 2 to its counter instead of just 1 is very particular. These counters are set to 2, and they don't have an undervalue cast, so when they're at 1, they do absolutely nothing. But when they're at 2 and equal value, they're going to send the ball to the left, and when they're over value, they're going to send the ball to the right. So what happens is, when the ball bounces to the right side, it's going to set all of those counters to 0, so that when it proceeds to go to the left, 2 is added, they equal value, and then it sends the ball to the left. However, the left side, once it reaches the left side, it's going to tell all of those counters to be added 1 to. When all of those counters equal 1, nothing will happen. However, when 2 is added to them afterwards, they will be over value, which will take priority over equal value, and send the ball to the right. So that's essentially how the ceiling and floor bounces work. I'm really happy with them. Small thing, this item detector in the middle is actually kind of detecting a circle that is just a little space away from the walls. It's actually in charge of determining whether or not a point has been won. Essentially, it's activating a timer every time you hit one of the walls, and if the ball doesn't re-enter the center within, I believe it is 5 seconds, then the system will know that the opposite side has won a point, and then it will reset the ball for the serve to send to the side which just lost the point. And the only other big thing that I think I need to worry about, if I'm not going into too much detail here, is our bot paddle and how it works. So you see there's an extra column of counters going this way. These are effectively doing the same thing as the rest of the counters, except instead of shifting the points that the ball can travel to, they're shifting these points here, which the paddle on the bot side can travel to. And this corresponds exactly with what the ball is doing. So if the modifier tells you to send it low, it's going to send it low. If the modifier is telling the ball to send it high, it's going to send the paddle higher, because it's teleporting the lower ones and the higher ones further up along the column to adjust for that. The thing that's getting in the way of the paddle working every single time, aside from just speed, is these random reflectors. So let's say point 6 is activated right here, and point 6 is going to tell the ball to move to it. It's also going to activate this corresponding random reflector, which is going to activate a plethora of these reflectors down here, which tells the paddle to move to it. However, you'll see it varies a little bit which one it actually goes to. So you can see there's different reflectors that it's activating at any given time. So some of those reflectors will correspond with right answers or positions that the ball will be at, and then 1 or 2 on every single random reflector, except for number 6, actually, because it's the serving position, and I don't really want the bot to miss the ball off of a straight serve, because I think that would be a little bit ridiculous. But otherwise, every single one gives the paddle an opportunity to make a mistake and miss the ball. But yeah, I think that just about sums it up. This has taken me oh so much time to complete. I have so many other projects planned that I absolutely cannot wait to get to, and I am thrilled to be finished with this, not just because I feel like it turned out amazingly, and I really think this is going to be a lot of fun, and I really hope that people enjoy it and catch it on tours, but I just am so much looking forward to getting to some new stuff and showing off the other ideas that I have. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you get the chance to try it out yourself, and have a nice day, folks. Bye-bye.